But of course, you can have something like a 1:2 or a 2:1, where the ratios are doubled or halved, and the same with 1:3 or 3:1. And I gave these examples because across human musical cultures, we see these small integer ratio categorical rhythms. So what do we do when we have a sequence like this? The first thing we can do is we can calculate the inter-onset interval of the notes, or the IOI, and we can do that for an entire sequence of sounds or calls or notes. And then you guys have seen this equation a bunch already, but we can calculate the ratio of adjacent intervals by taking the first one, its duration, and dividing by the duration of itself plus the next one. And the final thing we do is we plot the distribution of those ratios. And then we can use stats to figure out if they fall significantly on these small integer ratios. This was work done by Tim Roska and colleagues in 2020. Here you're looking on the x-axis, I put arrows for the small integer ratios they investigated, and on the y you have the probability density of those ratios in that type of music. And they found that there were significant peaks on the 1:2, 1:1, 1:2, 1:1, and 2:1 ratios. The neat thing is that they didn't just look at this in one human musical culture, they did several. And I think it's really interesting that across the different musical cultures, you get sometimes overlap in which ratios are important, but you also get some variability. And these types of ratios are actually universal across human musical cultures. So with any universal, I think it's natural to want to understand, is it actually restricted to humans? Are they widespread in the animal kingdom? Are they restricted in the animal kingdom? And so there's been a lot of work done, including some that was presented here. I'm just going to stick to two songbirds that the authors of the same paper looked at this in, so thrush nightingales and zebra finches. So they looked at the songs. Once again, they looked at the ratios, and for thrush nightingales, there's a significant peak at the 1:1 ratio or isochrony, and for zebra finches, also a significant peak at the 1:1 ratio. But something that's interesting to see here is that the distribution for zebra finches really looks much more normal, and when you listen, it sounds like thrush nightingale songs are more rhythmically complex. So I think there's more going on here than just a significant peak at isochrony. And because human music and birdsong are typically culturally transmitted traits, the authors of this paper came up with a hypothesis. So they believe that categorical rhythms may promote or emerge from the cultural transmission of learned vocalizations. And just to get it out of the way, I'm defining culture here as information or behavior that's shared within a community and acquired from members of your group through some form of social learning. So I think a logical extension of this hypothesis of theirs is that other species who have culturally transmitted, socially learned vocalizations should also show rhythm categories. And sperm whales fit the bill for that. So this species, they have both socially learned vocalizations and pervasive culture. Starting with the vocalizations, in social situations, sperm whales produce codas, which are stereotyped patterns of clicks, kind of similar to human Morse code. Here's an example of a waveform on the top and the spectrogram at the bottom of a sperm whale bout of codas. So this is the first coda, second, third, fourth, fifth, and here is what they sound like. And you'll notice those codas, the clicks sound very equally spaced, but some of the codas have 5 clicks and some have 8. So by varying the number of clicks and the tempo and the rhythm, sperm whales can create different types of codas. So this is a recording from a different group of whales. I've drawn arrows, there's regular echolocation in the background, but once again you have some codas and you have overlapped codas from 2 whales at the end. So here's what this file sounds like. That was the first coda. the sound system that we're dealing with in this research. But when you talk about sperm whales, it's really important to think about their social structure as well. So individual whales live in matrilineal social units, and females will stay with their moms for life. We know that calves learn their codas from other whales in their units, so that's telling us that the codas are socially transmitted. Different social units will then come together for hours or days or weeks at a time, and they'll associate. So they'll socialize together, they may forage, and then come back together, and they do this over shorter time periods. But importantly, only social units that use similar types of codas will associate. So even if they live in an area with lots of different groups of whales, they won't associate unless they share a coda dialect. And so this segments the population into cultural groups, which we call vocal clans. And again, so there's clear social segregation among whales that live in different cultural groups. That is the social structure level of focus in this study. So we had access to over 38,000 codas recorded from 9 vocal clans in 3 different regions. So two clans in more than 2 clans. Pacific Ocean clans, Mediterranean Sea clans, and Caribbean Sea clans. So I'm going to show you results from a few of the clans. The regular clan is named that way because the clicks in their codas are regularly spaced. So this is an example of a coda with 4 clicks, 5 clicks, 6. Probably unsurprisingly, when we checked a bunch of different ratios, we found a really big, significant peak at the 1-to-1 ratio, and also at the 3-to-1 ratio, which was a little random. And the colors are a bit hard to see, but they're easier in this next plot. So the 4+ clan is a cultural group of whales that also lives in the Pacific. They're named 4+ because they usually start their codas with 4 equally spaced clicks, and then they'll add additional clicks on at the end. And so here we see something kind of interesting. So once again, there's a significant peak at isochrony, but you'll notice that the rest of the distribution is shifted to the left, and that's because the spacing of those 4 clicks at the start is generally smaller than the spacing of clicks at the end. And here, just a note about methodology. For each of the dark green sections, we're asking if there are more ratios in those bins or in the bins directly on either side of it. So that's what the stats is based on. If we move to warmer waters, the Eastern Caribbean 1 clan makes a coda, the 1 + 1 + 3, which is kind of like 1, 2, cha-cha-cha. In sperm whale lingo, they also make an isocronous 5-click coda. Once again, significant peak at isochrony, but this time we also have a peak at the 2-to-1 ratio. And that's because in that coda at the top of the screen, those first 2 intervals are about double the spacing of the second 2. We see the opposite pattern in the Mediterranean clan. So they make a bunch of variations of a 3 + 1 coda. And if we look at the plot, peak at isochrony, now we have a peak at the 1-to-2 ratio because the beginning intervals are shorter than the last one. My personal favorite clan is called the palindrome clan. Just to reiterate, palindromes are words that are spelled forwards and backwards the same. We named them this because their codas are generally symmetrical, like palindrome words. And we actually, for this clan, found a number of significant ratios. So there's a lot going on. But I want to focus on this 2 + 2 coda type because by far that's the most common one. So if we just look at 4-click codas, we can get a different plot. So before I was showing you the ratios for all of their coda types, this is just for 4 clicks. And we see something really uncommon. We see a significant dip at isochrony. But I put this up because there's actually a human musical culture where the same thing happens. So just another parallel between what the sperm whale cultures are doing and what some human cultures are doing. So to summarize, sperm whale codas exhibit categorical rhythms, and those preferences vary by cultural group. I think this provides some support from the hypothesis that came out of that first paper. Again, categorical rhythms promoting or emerging from cultural transmission of learned vocalizations. And I think it's interesting to think about how culture could be driving similarities in communication systems especially when sound production mechanisms differ. So how sperm whales produce sound is very different from humans or songbirds, and when acoustic environments differ. So we have terrestrial species now that show these rhythms, and marine species. And I just want to end with, as promised, a question. There are some flaws with the methodology that we've used to say, yes, there are enough ratios on a small integer versus no. And we're also a bit restricted in the types of ratios we can look at. So I just want to go back. This was the plot from the palindrome plan. And if we just zoom in on this, statistically significant results say that we have a peak at the 1-to-1 ratio. But it very much looks like the true peak is actually a bit to the left. So I tried to do a bit more methods heavy in the hopes that I can have some conversations about this. So if you have any ideas about better ways to be able to test more complex, simple ratios, then I would love to chat with you. And I just want to say that I have not had the pleasure yet of studying sperm whales off of South Africa, but Fanny is the expert here on that. So if you have questions about sperm whales more in your local waters, he's the person to talk to. So thank you very much.